Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be drawing some animal characters. You know that I normally draw bears a lot, but some animal characters I don't practice quite as often. This time I wanted to try 3 different characters, and one of them was, of course, a bear, but I also wanted to try a couple of characters that are quite a bit different and unusual for me. In this case, I'm starting off with a hedgehog. Hedgehogs are really interesting to draw because they're a bit strange with their body shape. So, coming up with a body shape for an anthropomorphic character was a bit more challenging than my usual bears and cats and all that. Hedgehogs have quite a big body, and it would be way too crazy to make it realistic in the proportions. So I gave him a bit of a thicker body, but I made sure to make the feet and hands really small, because that's one of the defining characters of what hedgehogs really look like. They have tiny feet and also a small head, but in this case I decided to go with a regular sized head. In case you're looking at the sketches on the left and wondering what is going on with them, I can tell you that I used to draw a lot of hedgehogs when I was little, and part of what you're seeing there is probably my bad habits from back in those days when I was like 6 years old and all my hedgehogs looked really like my favorite toys, and they weren't very realistic, I have to say. So, strange shapes all around. The drawing itself was done with a Kuretake Bimoji brush pen, and this is currently my favorite brush pen. It's like a felt tip brush pen, but it can get really thin lines, but also has a little bit of line variation. So it kind of looks like a dip pen, but it's actually a brush pen, which means that I don't have to sit at my desk with an open ink bottle. Very useful, I have to say. And I'm doing the coloring with Copics. Here you see me doing the background, and as you can see it's not very elaborate, because I actually don't have that many Copics that are particularly useful for backgrounds. Most of my Copics are really good for characters, and the backgrounds need a lot more lighter colors. So I'm basically just making a soft focus effect with what I have, and I generally think it's a bit too dark in most cases. For backgrounds I will probably need some more lighter colors in the long run. Right now I'm using them mainly for characters, and for that they're simply fantastic. I love Copics, the way they blend, it's just really nice. I also have a set of touch new markers, and I don't like them that much. They have a bullet nib, and blending is really hard with them. With Copics it's much easier to do the blending, but then they're also much more expensive than the touch new markers. For the details of the drawing I used mostly colored pencil and also some white jelly roll. That one I used a lot for his hair, which is actually his spines. His spines were actually a consideration in his character design, and I didn't want to do his whole backside. His hair seemed like just the right compromise. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this guy turned out. And even though I couldn't really get the background as detailed as I wanted it to be, I'm still happy with the outcome. For the next drawing, I decided to draw a bear. How surprising for me. But well, I still wanted to improve on what I was doing, or maybe explore something different from my usual style. So I varied his head shape a little. I always go back and forth between making the bears look like baby bears and adult bears. In this case, I think I tried to do something in the middle, and I'm not sure it was entirely successful. It still looks like a bear, but like an odd-shaped one. Don't get me wrong, I still think he's really cute, but I think sticking to either adult bear or baby bear is the better choice. Aside from the head shape, I went with my usual way of constructing a bear body though. They have short legs and a really large body, which makes it sort of difficult to determine the proportions between head and body, and it's somehow a bit difficult to make a distinction between a baby bear, an adult bear, a teenage bear. It needs a bit of practice to get the proportions right. What one shouldn't do when designing anthropomorphic characters is to just stick an animal head on a human body. That will look either really odd or really creepy. Especially animal heads on human bodies in very girly poses have a tendency to look really disturbing. If you still need some kind of reference, then the best strategy is probably to use a picture of a boy aged 5 to 8 or something like that, because there the proportions are sort of getting in the right direction depending on the animal you're trying to design. Taking the specific body proportions of the animal into account will help to make it look like that specific animal, but you also have to make certain not to overdo it. This is exactly why I found designing girl animal characters so difficult, and it took me about a month and a half of practicing to finally get a female character, it was a cat, that I actually liked. With bears, I haven't actually yet managed to come up with a female character that I liked. I simply haven't yet figured out the right proportions for that, so I'm sticking with male bears. It's sort of my comfort zone by now. For this drawing I actually used a different paper. The first drawing was made in a sketchbook that has very thin paper, and it's really nice with Copics. I like how they look on that paper, but you can't really use watercolor with it, and in this case I wanted to use watercolor for the background because that's much easier than trying to find light Copics in my collection. I used the Prima Marketing Woodlands palette for the background, and I can't give you any pigment information about that palette at all. They have nice color names. One of the colors is called Bear, so you can imagine why I bought it. But it's really more of a set to be used in sketchbooks, not for final pieces. Or at least that's how I use it. The colors are also a bit more opaque than what I'm normally using, so I'm still practicing with that. Overall, I prefer transparent colors, so it's a bit of a stretch, and I've only painted 2 paintings with them so far. You also may have noticed that I didn't only use the Kuretake brush pen for this. I also used Faber Castell Pitt pens, and I really like those for backgrounds, because they can seem a bit lighter than the main character black, and that creates a little bit of a distance and maybe a less in focus effect. Overall, I enjoyed the combination of using Copics and watercolor, and I think I'll be using that a bit more in the future, especially in my sketchbooks. For the last character study, I decided to do something really unusual. I wanted to draw a reptile. I've drawn a crocodile character before, but never any other reptiles. So for this I wanted to try a turtle. And they're especially challenging because they have similarly odd body proportions as hedgehogs. So it fit well in the series of attempts to find new ways of exploring body shape and proportions in my characters. After a couple poses, I decided that maybe sitting wasn't the right pose for this guy, because he probably wouldn't be able to get up again. So in the end, I decided to have him standing at the bar. It was kind of the same idea, but without having to solve that problem. Like with the bear, I decided to use mixed media paper for this and combine Copics and watercolor again. Surprisingly, it's not a combination I see very often. Usually, people use either Copics or watercolor, even though they're really a good combination, I would say. Watercolors is a lot cheaper and you can get a huge range of colors from just a few pigments. And with Copics, you need a lot of pens to get different colors, and mixing new colors is a lot more challenging. Backgrounds also use up a lot of ink, and since Copics are expensive, why not use the cheaper option of watercolors to do the heavy lifting? You can still have the same great blending effects for your characters and at the same time save some ink. I think it's a really good combination. For some reason, people who work in watercolors are usually worried about light fastness though, and Copics aren't light fast. Watercolors tend to be usually, or at least the most commonly used pigments are, and so it might seem a bit strange to combine the two. From the perspective of someone who likes to use Copics, it does make a lot of sense though, because Copics aren't light fast. It doesn't really matter what kind of watercolors you use as long as they get you the effects you want. I guess one reason why it's not often combined is that the papers that are good for Copics are usually quite bad for watercolor, and the other way around. Watercolor paper tends to soak up a lot of Copic ink, and Copics are expensive, so why would you use that paper? But paper that can take Copics well, like Bristol board for example, doesn't work very well with watercolor. So really the only solution is to use mixed media paper, and not all of them handle watercolor really well. I think this Canson XL paper was okay-ish. No comparison with real watercolor paper, of course, and I wouldn't want to be using wet and wet with this paper a lot either, but for my purposes it worked actually quite well. There are some watercolor papers that work quite well with Copics, and don't feather as badly as on some other papers. In any case, what I like most about this drawing is that he has clothes under his shell. I don't really know how that would work, but I find the idea quite interesting and funny. The main challenge was of course not to think too much of the Ninja Turtles, but I guess that's an issue with almost all character design. There have been other bears, and other rabbits, and other girls, and so on and so forth. I wasn't particularly concerned with originality in this case. I just wanted to see what happens if I turn a turtle into a character. I had never done that before, and I think it worked out quite well in the end. I'm not entirely happy with the coloring in this case, because his shell is a little muddy, I would say. And also, in case you haven't noticed, the perspective of the stones in the floor is way off. I guess that's how anyone who's had a few drinks would see the turtle. In the end, these are just studies for my sketchbook though, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I can try again, or I can try with a different animal, and in the end, it's always good practice. There are still a lot more animals that I can try and maybe improve on the results of this experiment with a next run of character studies. If you have any suggestions of what animal I should try next, then maybe leave me a comment below and I can see what I can do. I already tried to challenge myself quite a bit with this one, since hedgehogs have such odd-shaped bodies, and the same goes for turtles. The bear was part of my comfort zone, I admit that, but the other two were far out there. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching these experiments. I myself had a lot of fun, and it was interesting to experiment a little with these different animals that I've never tried drawing before. In any case, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon for the next video. Bye!